Well, thank you everyone for coming to our next webinar here. This is actually a really cool one. Jim is one of our first ever customers that adopted our product, Login Enterprise, for physical endpoint testing only. It was a unique use case we started rolling out in the second half of last year, and we wanted to bring a Login VSI customer that was kind of one of the first ones really wanting to adopt us for that in to tell kind of how they did it, what they were looking at. You know, in the Windows endpoint world, there's, a million different management tools and benchmarking tools and all this stuff. And, we thought customers are the best ones to tell their own story. So with that, I'll introduce myself and I'll let Jim introduce himself. My name is Ron Oglesby. I'm an SVP here at Login. Basically, I run the pre-sales and post-sales engineering team, our services, our pre-sales engineers and architects. Been in tech too long, back when even that photo, I had less gray hair than I have today. And before I got on the software side, I spent 12 years as a consultant and a field architect for some of the bigger partners in the space. And then about the last 14 years, I've been on the software side, working at places like Unidesk, Citrix, VMware, et cetera. And Jim McSorley is our guest today. I'm so glad to have you, Jim. Maybe you could introduce yourself to the folks.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Happy to be here and happy to help you guys out with, giving some customer testimony. I've been the head of end user tech here for a mid-sized bank for a few years, but I've been in a variety of industries over nearly 3 decades. And most recently focused on end user tech and IT operations at rather large companies, and really helping to focus on data-driven automation. And just a little side note, just for things I do outside of work, would be auto restoration and woodcraft. So I like to build things, right? I'm a builder. That's sort of my modus operandi. But yeah,
That's awesome.
let's get started.
Yeah, very appreciative. And let's set some context here and what we see a lot of times in new potential customers demoing our software, trying it out, POCing it. We see the constant themes over and over. IT staff, they're struggling to keep up with the rate of change. When I got into IT and I mean, many of the young folks in IT, Jim, might laugh. I was, around when we used to install entire server operating systems via floppy disk, right? The rate of change was unbelievably slow. Sometimes you wouldn't touch a server for months and months and months from a functionality standpoint or a patching standpoint. And now, especially when you look at security packages, everything from, DLP tools and anti-malware, AV tools, whitelist, blacklist, all these things. And they're constantly shoved out into our environments. And very rarely are they really tested for functionality or performance. The dev side, especially when you start to look at Scrum and Agile and how they integrate QA into their teams, and then even the folks that are adopting DevOps practices and automation, they start to do testing. But really, the Windows side, especially endpoint applications, have never really been set up for kind of continually testing and reevaluating their performance, their functionality. And most of that is because the testing is manual in a lot of cases. You talk to folks who they have VDI or they have endpoints. It's always the same. Well, we have some super users, we have some app owners. We ask some people to log in and test it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Kind of a fire and pray concept when they shove out these updates. And then the automatic updates. I put in here, remember CrowdStrike, only because CrowdStrike was a global thing that everyone heard of. A data package delivered, an executable somewhere on the machine that actually had bad code, but it would never be noticed unless there was a bad data package. Those two come together like the worst case of peanut butter and chocolate and blow up. But it happens all the time with apps inside of environments. It just doesn't affect the world. It affect this people's 800-person call center. It affect these folks over here. They're 500 people that do inside sales because we blew up their main app one morning. And so all of this change, we think, makes Windows endpoints a place where our testing can really help. And that's where your story gets started, Jim. And I just love to hear about, we obviously we kind of made this deck together and I love the story, but I'd love you to take over and just, start here. How did you guys find us? What drew you in? All that fun stuff.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Ron. I mean, as you were describing some of the, constant change, I'm reminded of that meme that says, I don't always test my code, but when I do, I test in production, right? So that's what that's the type of stuff we're trying to overcome. And like I mentioned earlier, as a builder, as a guy who loves data, the question was, your point resonated with me, and the question became, what kind of tools can we use in order to get better control over how we manage change and how do we quantify what's going on? So yeah, let me share a little bit about how we came together. I mean, it was really earlier this year even that I was attending an EUC conference in South Florida, got a chance to see some of what your product was all about, and was really impressed at the scale at which you were operating against a VDI, architecture, and how you were gathering automated data and et cetera, and really telling a story about scalability and et cetera. And I said, well, wait a minute, my area is very little VDI. We're not that large of an organization. We have a lot of physical endpoints that are in need of a lot of help. And my team's responsible for patching. We're responsible for the operating system, pushing out new software, and et cetera. I said, well, what if I pointed this solution at our physical endpoints and instead of just a VDI environment? We talked a little bit about that. And one of the things your team put my team onto right away was the training, the online training material. It was very easy for us to get in there, spend hours. I actually had a couple team members that just absorbed all of it as fast as they could. And that led to some of the success that I'm about to share. But we were able to get really deep, really quick. And as technologists, that was greatly appreciated. We were able to install our proof of concept in record time. I'll be able to explain a little bit more about how we did that, and maybe give some tips and tricks to those other desktop support teams that might deal with the same challenges that we do. But we were able to start demonstrating immediate value. I mean, literally within a week, we were reporting back to the executive team on what we found, even through the proof of concept, not even having deployed fully to production.
Wow.
So that was a great, really quick start, really
That's awesome.
rapid change to the environment. So yeah, when we first started talking, my team had envisioned some initial use cases, like what would this look like? How would you use? Okay, your background with Login VSI is primarily things like VDI and et cetera. It's like, well, how do we turn the focal point of that skill set? And one of the first things we thought of is this idea of A/B testing. Now, this goes back to my days in doing internet development and creative marketing and the like, where it's like you do an A/B test to see which one will a customer respond to, which advertising will they respond to more quickly. And so we see this with email campaigns and things like this, where you run a campaign and you get statistics back from scenario A and you compare it to scenario B, and then you continually refine your marketing material based on that type of. So I said, well, what if we did A/B testing against the performance of an endpoint when it was subject to our current condition versus the proposed condition? And that could be anything. It could be a patch. It could be new software. It could be a change to a security policy. Whatever that condition is, let's pick the one thing that's changing and compare it to what we have today. Did the situation get better? Did it get worse? Did it stay the same? And that then would inform decision-making on how quickly can we move forward, to your point about managing the rapid changes in the environment. So that gives us the ability to quantify what that change represents. So that was an initial use case we had envisioned. We also envision the idea of this, just doing performance diagnostics. Just do a one-off. It's like when you take your car to the shop, they plug it into a computer and they say, what's wrong with it? How do you do that with an endpoint in and of itself? So I was like, when a user calls the service desk and says, my computer is slow, then we're like, well, what does that mean, right? We don't even know where to begin. And so we envisioned creating a kind of a baseline script or baseline diagnostic that would give us quantitatively tell us what might be going on that machine, so that our escalation teams would be well informed. And this would lead to an increased root cause resolution based on trending, based on analytics of what we should expect versus what we're seeing. And then lastly, it's like, okay, that's a one-point solution, right? Literally point that script at one machine at a time and see what you get. But what if you put this on a bunch of machines located all over your company and let it run? Just let it cook. And then maybe even set up some sort of monitoring so that you could say, wait a minute, there's an anomaly over here. There's something going on in this locale or in this office or on this type of computer that we didn't anticipate. And so the idea is you could do a full stack, a full end-to-end user experience simulation, and in a way that was, as if the user was doing it themselves, which I can talk to in a minute. But this idea of monitoring the entire environment using this tool set. And we've already started to do some of these. I'd like to go into a little bit more detail on some of these and see how these sort of what we were originally envisioning has come to light.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier the POC was in record time. We really, I'm not kidding, 2 days. And how in the world did you do that? Because we're a bank, right? We've got a lot of security controls. We've got a lot of procedures and policies. We've got a whole separate server team, a security team, and a network team that would need to be engaged in order to stand up anything on our network. And so we didn't want to be, we didn't want to be standing in line like these people in the photo here. And so we said, wait a minute, what if we can completely self-contain this in a lab? What if we could stand up a Linux image directly on a robust but capable, but pretty basic desktop? Hack the host file, right? Real old school type stuff. Hack the host file so we didn't have to bother entering a live DNS entry, and it would still respond correctly. And then and not have to provision a whole server, not have to provision a new subnet, these types of things. And so we were able to control our own destiny in a very quick time frame. And use some of the out-of-the-box workloads provided by Login VSI, that's standard out-of-the-box stuff, and say just load it up and see how far we can get. We also wrote a batch file that launches the whole thing in a way that we were able to circumvent the security, and I know that I'm using the wrong language here, but circumvent the security protocols. In other words, we're allowed to run test scripts in a lab, right? We have machines that are committed to doing that, and the security team is well aware that when they see a rogue script going off on certain machines, that that's the lab. Yeah, okay, that's already a contained environment. And so we have a directory, one specific directory where IT people can run scripts. And so that's the basis of Login VSI, was that we had to launch a script. So again, kind of old school, we set up a batch file to launch that script on that appliance. And in a matter of a couple of days, now my team had already gone through the hours of training that were provided. But with that training, they were able to stand this up really quick. And we had some immediate findings. But before I get there, let me just give people a sense. Sorry, Ron, go ahead to the next one. Let me give people a sense of what we're talking about with these scripts. First of all, the code you're looking at was provided to us. And you can also record these capabilities. You can almost like creating a macro in Microsoft VBA, if you're familiar with that, where you literally hit the record button, and then as you walk through these various functions. In this example, we're talking about launching the Zoom application to join a Zoom meeting. And if we were to zoom in on some of this code, no pun intended, but here we see a snippet that I want to highlight some key points. And it's the start timer function in particular. This is as though you hired an employee to sit there, run through a process while you stand with a clipboard and a stopwatch, but it's all automated. You don't have to actually hire an employee, and you don't have to actually stand there with a stopwatch. So when you hit the start timer, it's because it's running the routine that joins the Zoom meeting. And further down, you can see where the stop timer command is executed. And these statistics, these data are being captured in the back end so that we can go back and do the analytics on it after the fact. So that's just an example of a workload that we were able to use right out of the box and start to show immediate value. So thanks for that, Ron. And the next one then, where we talk about some of the things we learned. Some of the things we learned along the way. So as we thought broadly about this very quick proof of concept, we're like, okay, how do we take the initial use cases that we had envisioned and bring it to practical terms of things that we can use to start developing a strategy? The first thing we came upon was this idea that there are different functions within the bank, right? Different people perform different roles, they use different software, and they primarily need to do their job based on a subset of activities. And the knowledge worker persona was the one that came to mind right away. It's not a bank teller. It's not someone who's, working at a security desk and, just processing badges or something like this. It's the broadly speaking knowledge worker. They need to log into email. They need to open Microsoft Word. They need to join a Teams meeting, what have you. They might need to open an Adobe file, etc. So we created a knowledge worker script that was very targeted and very intentional. We designed it to be able to run in roughly 15 minutes. Like if a human were to do it, it should take about 15 minutes. And then we ran it over and over again to see what kind of statistics we could get out of this model. And then we would tweak it a little bit, make sure this statistic was included, make sure that start time was in the right sequence, that kind of stuff. And so we were able to customize it for our own specific user experience. And the recording tool called Application X-Ray really became our friend in helping, because we're not programmers, right? We do plan to engage our QA team that's very familiar with writing program scripts and bots and this types of thing. But we're desktop support people, right? So scripting is a rather rudimentary skill, but we were able to piece this together even from that point of view. The goal here is to have a master script for a given persona. And I can envision 3 or 4 other persona. Every company is going to be a little bit different. But the idea is that that persona is a well understood script. It's been refined, it's been baselined, and now we can use that as the starting point to start to go after all of those other use cases that I had shared with you earlier. And so that was the key learning, this idea of persona. But we do got to be careful, right? Word of caution. Don't change that. Once you choose that baseline workload, don't change it a lot. Like be really conscientious, because if you make a change to it going forward and try to compare those statistics to anything that happened in the past, that's kind of an apples to oranges comparison. You're no longer really, there may be some core statistics that hold true, but you want to be really thoughtful about not changing these baseline workloads that often. But if you do need to change them, just do one at a time, do one variable at a time, so that you can then explain, well, why did this, have an impact, or why did that have an impact? And you can keep a log that says, yeah, this week we made this, and keep a journal and be like, look, in this month we made this change, and 3 months later we made that change, and be precise, because somebody's going to come back and say, well, what did the data tell us 6 months ago? You got to put an asterisk on those findings, because you're not necessarily going to line up with where you are today if you don't account for the deltas along the way.
Yeah, and there's something interesting here I'd like to point out. Like we have always talked about, and you mentioned some of the scripts that are out of the box, right? Like the Zoom one, and our knowledge worker, which does all of Microsoft Office, and I think we have like a Google Docs knowledge worker also, and stuff like that at different teams and Zoom and everything. But one of the interesting things about it was we had never called it persona based. We would always say, the line of business could have, your sales team could have one script, or one actual test that's a combination of scripts. Your engineering team obviously uses different apps, so they could be. But we've actually now stole your word, persona based workloads, because it does fit so well. It's what are the users doing daily, and just try to at least get something that's representative of what they do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad to have contributed that. And in that slide, we also saw a picture of a guy painting the Golden Gate Bridge. And I don't know if you remember, the guy who paints the Golden Gate Bridge, as soon as he's done, he has to start over again, right?
That's
Because it took
right.
that long, right? And so the key point there is that this master script for a given persona runs over and over and over again. And
Yeah.
that speaks to how we were able to leverage some of this in a minute.
It gives you
But
some
yeah,
good data.
yeah.
It gives you some good data. So
It gives you, well,
continue. Yeah.
yeah, so that's the first bullet here, right? Continuous testing. Like we literally set up what should have been a 15-minute script to run 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And we're very thoughtful on running it during the actual business hours. There's no point in running it at 2 in the morning. If
Yeah.
things are going to be lightning fast. There's nobody on the network at that hour. So what we're really doing is we're hiring that bridge painter. We're hiring that person to sit there and just keep doing it over and over, but it's completely automated. I don't have to actually hire anybody. And so that's gathering statistics, constantly running behind the scenes. It's doing 2 things. One, it's furthering our understanding of the current baseline environment. If there are other variables, if the network team makes a change over here, or the database makes a team over there, we might detect that, or at least incorporate that into our understanding of where we are statistically. And so that idea of letting that thing continuously run became an important construct for comparison's sake. And so that baseline of the desired state configuration is ultimately what you're going to compare apples to apples as the time comes. It also looks for a week, almost like a seasonality, right? Well, gee, every Monday at 10 a.m., this script's really slow down. What should take 15 minutes is actually taking 20 minutes or longer. What's going on, at 10 a.m. on a Monday? And so you can compare day over day and time of day phenomena using this continuous testing. This then became the basis for doing the A/B test, which was the use case I originally spoke about, because now we had scenario A was at our fingertips. It was always running. So whenever we needed to compare against, I didn't have to go set it up. Scenario A was always there, and I could just tap into that continuously running data. And so that way I could focus on making sure the test script, the same script, was effective against whatever the scenario B happens to be. So
Yeah,
yeah, go
and
ahead.
why it's so interesting to me is you caught something there. Like I was never, as we designed this product and talked about endpoints, I wasn't usually thinking of continuous tests myself, right? I thought these A/B tests and maybe a performance test, and that's what endpoints would want. It was actually your group that said, no, 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 no. The continuous tests are really where everything starts for us. Which actually changed my mind about continuous tests for endpoints, because something you said there was we set it up to run in about 15 minutes, but what if it's taken 20? And what maybe people really don't realize at this point, and you showed a script there where we were timing the start of Zoom. Those stop timers are used all over, right? It doesn't just open Zoom, it actually connects to a meeting. You can make it change the view in Zoom from presenter to, deck, or deck back to presenter. And then your script might shut down Zoom and jump over and start Outlook and actually type an email and cut and paste. And it's actually doing what a normal user does, not just launching apps.
Yeah,
So if it takes 20 minutes, you've just uh, slow down the productivity. You're seeing something slow down the
yeah,
productivity of like 30%. You're like, wait a minute, why is
yeah.
this 30% longer? So it's very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, it's like hiring somebody to sit there and just do the same thing over and over and over again, with a stopwatch.
Yeah.
And if it's taking longer overall, then you know that that's a time of day or that's a scenario where you really need to look closer. And then you can get into the details of exactly what is it that was hung up or what was it that caused a delay. We often deal with end users. I refer to this as the blue wheel of pain, right? And everybody who uses Microsoft product knows what I'm talking about. It used to be an hourglass, right? It used to be a little hourglass that would flip on screen. And because, Outlook not responding. Well,
Mm-hmm.
if Outlook not responding, that script's going to sit there and wait, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to capture that phenomena. So there's a lot of times where we have issues. Users are reporting this problem or that problem. We've got nothing to go by. We can't recreate the problem. It's intermittent. It's unpredictable. And so by running this all day long, we have a better chance of being able to capture the moments in which that actually happens.
It's very cool. It's
Yeah.
very cool.
Yep. And then, yeah, so here's an example of a comparison. Now, there's a little bit of Photoshop magic here, but the spirit of this exercise is that, and this is real. We were, even from the POC in the lab, we detected where there were changes in the settings. It was mostly on the security settings having to do with Zoom, not having to do with scripting, but having to do with the Zoom environment itself. And we were able to reduce the join a meeting time during a certain time of day from roughly 2.5 seconds down to 1.5. We literally dropped a second of time, probably 30, call it 40% gain, just by changing the security settings for how our antivirus was interrogating the Zoom meeting launch, the Zoom application itself. And so that's a real example that we were able to determine even from the lab environment. We hadn't even gone to production yet.
Very cool.
So how would we use this going forward? Like as we continue to grow the use of this tool set, here are some ideas that we're working on right now. We use Intune, Entanium. I mean, there's a whole selection there of different ways you could do this, but we intend to create a package that allows us to then run the diagnostics against any given machine at any time. So when someone calls the service desk, the package has already been deployed. We can use other tools to then kick it off. And ultimately, I think we're going to use ServiceNow to kick it off. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there on the final bullet. But the idea then is that the diagnostic baseline script has already been deployed and is already ready to run on any endpoint from at any time for any reason. Taking that a step further, this idea of continuously running these routines in the lab, well, that's helpful. But what if you put it in the field? What if you have a satellite machine, a small desktop sitting in the corner, and its sole job at any given geography is to run these scripts continuously? And then now you're gathering this data across multiple geography. Now you can look for anomalies. between, say, our offices in New York versus our offices in Miami versus in Texas or whatever. And we can ask her, is this delay due to speed of light issues? Is this delay due to network configuration? Whatever that might be, we can start looking for and create baselines within a given geography. And when somebody calls to report, hey, this property is, this location is such and such is too slow, we'll say, yep, we've been seeing that. We know that, and either that's to be expected or there's something, something changed. We intend to take this concept of A/B testing and not just focus on individual products like Zoom or what have you, or Outlook, but rather make it part of our change control process. I envision a day where we'll go to change control and someone will say, show us include the results of your A/B test in your submission, right? And if you don't show that you've actually done the A/B testing, that change will be denied. Show me what it was before this applied change. Show me what the statistics indicate after the applied change. And then ask ourselves, is it an acceptable level of impact? Perhaps even the situation even got better, right? So now we're just bringing more value. I could see doing this monthly with around Patch Tuesday, right? On Patch Wednesday, make sure you've got a bunch of machines set up that you can say, hey, is this month's patch going to have any kind of negative consequence? This is the CrowdStrike problem. Nobody was putting a buffer in the middle, right? They were just saying, I trust the vendor, let's go for it. Well, if you can automate that, even if you only take a few hours to do a baseline assessment, right? Run it against your personas, your common persona, and just give it thumbs up, thumbs down, right? And that kind of gross, test, just that blunt instrument, I think could be very telling, especially if you were to have a catastrophic outcome.
Yeah.
Hey, we're about to roll out a big old new piece of software, and we're going to deploy it to every computer. No, you're not. not until you can prove to me that it's not going. Don't even yet another agent. The security team has yet another agent that they want to install. What is the impact? How do we measure that? And so there's a whole bunch of other examples. But where I really want to see this go is to empower the IT service desk, because we do use ServiceNow. I'd like to have them be able to launch that diagnostic script from within the ticket, and the results of that can be immediately attached to the ticket, so that if it needs to be escalated to other teams, that age-old problem of nobody did the analysis, nobody did their homework, nobody gave me the screenshots to recreate the problem. But if I have the diagnostic results compared to a baseline in the ticket, and when this gets escalated, then my more advanced team would have a much higher likelihood of being able to figure out the root cause.
Very cool.
So what has been the impact for my organization right out of the gate? We're not even fully implemented these ideas, right? We've only just started to scratch the surface. But the one I mentioned earlier was Zoom, that had to do with CPU consumption. And we were able to improve the antivirus policies and recover CPU cycles right out of the gate without even having left the lab. The other thing I found rather interesting is that, everybody wants to blame the network, right? We all know the old adage is like, oh, the network is slow. Is it though? Is there some other mechanism at play here? But what we were able to find was there were scenarios that we could bring to the network team, explain our methodology, highlight things like disk IO versus a network card, network card throughput. And that's some of the detailed statistics that are available, either through Login VSI directly or by correlating it with other products. And so we were able to show the network team, no, really, it's the NIC. There's something, the data's just, the packets aren't flying out the NIC card fast enough. And so we're able to go from a culture that says, I'm not going to help you until you prove it to me, because that's been the age-old problem, right? Nothing gets done until you can give evidence. But it shifted our language even to say, hey, network team, we really need your help. Can I show you, where exactly we think we need your help? And it completely changed the perspective on how those teams collaborate, because it was no longer a matter of being ill-informed and just finger pointing. Another thing I've already looked at is the patching, right? We talked a little bit earlier about on Patch Wednesday, setting this up and running it. What this allows us to do is overcome those arguments from the end user. Oh, I had to reboot my computer because you guys ran a bunch of patches and now it's really slow. Well, it's really slow because you took it to your home Wi-Fi. And I know that because I ran the diagnostic script while you were on VPN, right? So it's not the patches that were the problem. It was something to do either with their home Wi-Fi or maybe the VPN configuration in the moment, whatever. But just because these things happen at the same time doesn't mean that that determines the root cause, right? We've all heard this. Coincidence is not causation. And this tool set has allowed us to start to uncover that misunderstanding as well. We've already had some executives talk about what are the KPIs you want to include in your quarterly business review. I do believe that those metrics are going to be able to come out of that continuously running baseline scenario that we talked about. And of course, it's going to create nice pie charts and pretty pictures, and it'll make everybody more informed. But ultimately, the big picture here is that it's already started to improve the end user experience, and not through visual design, not the traditional definition of UX, but more of the digital employee experience, or DEX, right? And so if you have happy employees, you're going to get more productivity. So, kind of having fun here with the happy cows, but we do believe this will result in less tickets because we'll be able to proactively respond and make changes to the environment to overcome the issues before users either report it or suffer in silence, right? Which is a very common phenomena. We don't learn about it because they just put up with it. They stop calling. We can now, if we can detect it ourselves, then we can get ahead of it. We can find the ghost in the machine more readily, that we're no longer sort of just hunting and hoping. We do think that software itself will actually respond faster because, again, our antivirus solution wants to interrogate everything that's not whitelisted. This allows us to identify where those slow points are taking place. And then ultimately, as new solutions come online, we're going to have greater confidence to know that it's not going to, first do no harm. And so those new solutions are going to be proven to be first and foremost not having a negative consequence, hopefully even adding to the value of proving that it's improved performance would be the ideal scenario. So
Well,
those are the impacts of the direction, the strategies, it's shaping strategy. I think that's the biggest impact.
yeah, no, it's actually fairly amazing, and especially as I said, you guys, the initial use of continuous testing, the baselining and stuff, and this slide, people go, well, we've just kind of been talking. We have it. I am a employee for a software company, so I'm going to do like a 30-second commercial. But what we've been talking about here is how they're using Login Enterprise, and specifically our Login Enterprise for endpoints. And Jim's mentioned pieces of this as we went through, such as the virtual appliance that they deployed to essentially a Hyper-V installation on a PC. We use these virtual appliances. They're Linux virtual appliances to host the workloads. They give you an interface to view reports. They've got an API there, etc. And Jim's team is using a lot of what we call local test execution or desktop connector, where directly from that targeted machine, that machine you want to test on, it reaches out, executes a test, grabs the test and the parameters from our virtual appliance, brings it down and executes it. But the output is what's going on with the machine. And more importantly, what's going on with the machine as compared to previous runs. And this is where Jim was talking about his baseline and being able to literally quantify the deviation from that baseline. We do it from the user perspective. This is one of the unique things. Our workloads, our scripts, run these applications like a user. They open Word, they open documents, they copy and paste into documents, they type, they make pivot tables in Excel, all types of stuff. And you can do it for your apps too, right? You run AutoCAD, ArcGIS. We have scripts for some of these, but we have a tool. You just walk through and you record your app like a user. Like if they said, these are the 10 things I test in this app when I update it, just record those 10 things and you can play them back. And just some tips before we go to the audience questions. We did have one audience question that I'm going to hit. Tips for kind of implementing these new testing models, right? Your tests have to be automated. There's too many people these days that are doing QA by hand, right? They're doing UAT by hand. And a couple of things happen by that. You can make sure an app launches. You can make sure, say it's a healthcare app, that you can load a record, but it's really not creating any set of repeatable results that you can compare before and after. On the strategy side itself, what do you want to do? You want to crawl, walk, run. You want to start off, play with the software so you understand limitations, architecture, things like that. Doesn't matter if it's our software or somebody else's. You want to understand how it lays out, how it executes, where things run. And that allows you to start to say, what type of changes are we really trying to get here? What are we trying to capture? Some people are trying to capture changes that originate in other groups of IT, like security teams. Some are just trying to actually apply it to their normal change control process. Then you can move into integrating this with the rest of IT, with app owners, with testers, people you would normally have test it. And the reason you do this as you move up is it allows you to not overlap work effort. You can have a QA person, an app owner, write a script for their app or literally record their app. And the QA team or the security team can also run that same script and execute it and say, is what we're about to do going to break anything from this user's perspective? I always like to focus on the most common functions and common breakpoints, right? Whenever we update Axe in the past, over the last 3 years, we've had problems twice with this functionality, right? It breaks an integration with another app, or when we update this app, it always sets this service back to start and we don't want it to run. You can check all those things, the common ones. How do your users use it every day? You don't have to click every button in an app. You have to do the 80% where most things break. Then you can baseline the existing endpoints, right? What are our existing corporate builds look like, whether it's the OS, whether it's a virtual machine or a physical? Because if you don't know what they're currently doing, if you just roll this out after a change, you can't actually have that before and after comparison. And to echo something Jim said earlier, minimize the changes to your workloads, right? If you go in and you make a serious modification to a test and you say, we used to just run the knowledge worker, launch Office products, check email, hit a browser. Now we're adding in this app, whatever this app happens to be. It could be a PDF reader, or it could be something heavy like ArcGIS or AutoCAD. You add that in, it changes the workload, it adds additional load to the machine. That means that the timings that we were just talking about, maybe not individual app timings, like how long did it take Excel to launch or how long did it take to save an Excel file, but the duration of the overall script, like Jim was mentioning, it used to run in 15 minutes, now it runs in 20. Well, you just added an entire app to it. Maybe that's why it's taking longer. So minimize those changes when possible. Now, for that one audience question we had, I'll hit it. You mentioned that there were out-of-box apps and specifically Office apps. Do you have tools or scripts to test any security or AV software? That's an interesting question. So the tools themselves aren't like a security testing tool or an AV testing tool or, and you guys have all seen these in places like Tom's Hardware and different, or it's not a tool just to load a machine and say, here's what your GPU looks like. Here's how your memory is reacting to the load we're throwing at it. What we do is we actually push workload into a Windows session, whether it's a laptop or a VDI instance or a single cloud PC, and allow the applications to execute like a user would use them. File open, file save, grab this, open up a shared document, time all that, give it back to you, report on functionality. Now, how you test it, and I actually knew this question was coming because we had recorded this before. We have the concept of basic test planning that you guys can do, but it's really simple. You're going to make your test plan. You're going to benchmark the existing stuff, right? Baseline it without those agents. Right? If you've got security agents, just build a machine, baseline it without it. Then you can start to do additional tests, right? Maybe the agent's on there and I want to exclude a specific app directory, or I want to exclude a specific set of applications, or I need to whitelist something. Make those changes, hit the go button and rerun the test. Again, there's no person, there's no stopwatch, there's no forms. You just rerun the test, go grab a cup of coffee, come back. And each iteration, you can show those changes. I love that, Jim. You had something where you said you reclaimed how much CPU? Something like 10 or 20.
Yeah, like 20%. Just and to touch on your point earlier about it's not really a white hat or black hat type of a security testing tool, but it is looking at the impact of these security policies from an end user's perspective. So, I wouldn't use it for, validating a penetration test or anything like that. But once the results of a pen test come through, you need to then make changes to your environment according to their findings. Well, okay, what kind of an impact is that going to have on the end user experience? That's where I would connect the dots.
Perfect. Yeah, it makes total sense. And this is that concept, or this goes back to one of the things I was saying. End user applications in a Windows world, especially admins, desktop teams, they don't have a lot of tools to drive those applications. It's not like SaaS or web apps where there's a million tools out there to pound on your API or whatever. So we have to deal with it from this perspective. But you can test your apps against your AV, right? You just make your AV changes, you make your DLP changes, you whitelist, blacklist changes, and just retest. As far as what applications are already out there, a couple of links for you guys. Application workloads. That's just a sample list of a bunch of shared workload scripts, Zoom, ArcGIS, Epic Systems, all types of other apps that we've helped with customers, but now customers really record their own. We also have a free product training. You can go into our site if you want to try it out and go through our training. Of course, I always say, why don't you jump on a demo and take a look? And you can get a demo. We've got a sneak peek on our website and on YouTube. You can go out and just watch. It's a little 3-minute demo that says, what am I going to see if I spend a half hour or an hour with you guys? Go ahead and try that. Jim, I want to say thank you so much for being on the webinar today. Your story is really, really cool. We're going to put it out. I'm going to make sure people get a chance to listen to you. I think that there are a lot of organizations, you talk to huge organizations, 80,000 users. They're very into change control, continuous monitoring, trying to figure this out. But I think that even yours, where you're just looking at thousands and not tens of thousands, right? The same principles apply. You're at enough scale that you have to have something continually monitoring and ways to differentiate and quantify these changes. And I think that, let's face it, there's more 10,000 person companies than there are 100,000 person. It's good to hear a shop that's not, Fortune 100 doing something really cool. So I really appreciate you being on to tell the folks about it.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Ron. I've enjoyed it, and I would agree with that sentiment that if a small company can do it and find value, then and we know this thing is designed to scale to really massive quantities. So I would only dream of being in an organization 10 or 100 times the size because I think it's the same effort. It
is.
You would get even more reward out of it because it is so remarkably scalable given your VDI background, and then applying it to the physical realm. Means that the sky's the limit.
Outstanding, Jim. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for attending. Check out Login VSI.